Hi, y'all. Happy Tuesday. I keep trying to figure out what to call everybody. Friends, I use, because there are a lot of folks. I mean, Scott Reich has his aficionados, and Gigi has alibiers, but I haven't come up with a name for our folks yet. So I guess you're just all friends. Welcome to the first True Crime Tuesday. Unfortunately, as I was scheduling this, I realized that we've scheduled at the same time as Scott Reich when he goes live, and I know a lot of you want to hit both. So I'd love some feedback on whether you think I should stay on Tuesday or whether I should move to Wednesday, because we want to spread out all this interesting legal goodness we've got planned. So let me know what you think in the comments, and we'll adjust accordingly. Some of the things I thought we would talk about tonight. Oh, first of all, I want to remind everybody that any super chats that you are generous enough to leave us go directly to our moderators. And we appreciate anything that you can do for them. Extra glass of wine or a pizza, help, any little bit helps out. So I thought tonight we'd talk about some cases that we haven't talked about. And I've gotten some questions already from folks who have been sending them to me in the last week or so. So I thought we'd talk about Darrell Brooks and Alec Murdaugh, the Murdaugh cases down in South Carolina, the Piketon Massacre, the Wagner family that trial's going on now. I'm sure that a lot of people have questions about the Delphi case and the sealing of all those documents. And then, of course, little monkey Michael Vaughn. I also noticed that Casey Anthony is doing a documentary, and man, I'm saying a lot tonight. And I would like to talk a little bit about that case as well for anybody who wants to do a little catch up on that. I think it's interesting that her theory of the case has evolved over time, and she makes some allegations that people are kind of having a hard time understanding or accepting. So, but I thought I'd go through the questions I have, and I wanted to start with Darrell or Darrell. I'm not sure how he pronounces that. Brooks. He was the fellow who drove his car through a Christmas parade, and he represented himself. At the last minute, he fired his court-appointed attorneys and told the court that he wanted to represent himself. I think anytime a judge ends up with a pro se litigant, with someone who has decided to represent themselves, it presents a lot of challenges, because lawyers are trained to understand the rules of evidence and when motions can be made, when evidence can come in. And I think sometimes people who are representing themselves, who are not trained lawyers, are at a real disadvantage. In spite of that, I thought Mr. Brooks did a decent job of representing himself when he could control his outbursts and his emotional dysregulation. Much of the time, the judge had to resort to moving him into a different courtroom with a video feed because he was so disruptive in court. He kept making the same motions over and over again, even though the judge had denied them. And it will be interesting to see, now that he's been convicted and sentenced, I think today or yesterday, I'm not sure which. It'll be interesting to see what kind of appeals that he files. I thought Judge Darrell was very patient with him. She was very respectful of him. It is not an easy task to keep someone who is that out of control from doing themselves terrible damage with the jury. I think she did as good a job as any judge could have been at keeping him from really doing himself terrible damage. It will be interesting to see what sort of grounds he comes up with for appeals, because undoubtedly there will be appeals forever for him. I did have one person who asked, he complained about wearing a restraint and called it a shock restraint. So I wanted to talk a little bit about that. When a person goes to court and they are in their civilian clothes because they're in front of a jury, there are restraints that they wear under their clothing. And they vary depending upon the jurisdiction and what particular kind of equipment that jurisdiction has. But it's not unusual for them to have something under their clothing. Sometimes it's a leg restraint that locks open so that they can't bend their knee if they get up and try and run. Sometimes it is some sort of almost like a taser that law enforcement can trigger if in fact they get out of control in the courtroom. In 27 years, I saw a couple of outbursts in the courtroom where people got out of control. Thank goodness there was burly court security in the courtroom that was available to help someone get themselves back under control. But it does happen. And there certainly have been instances, although much fewer since most of the courthouses have metal detectors, but there have been instances of violence in the courthouse. So it's not an idle concern, particularly when you have someone who is as explosive as Mr. Brooks was. So it's very likely he was wearing a restraint device, and it may very well have been a shock device of some kind, like a taser. Let's talk about the Murdaughs. For those of you who are not familiar with this case, and it is absolutely fascinating, Alec, or Alec as it's pronounced down there in the South Carolina Low Country, Alec Murdaugh is a fourth generation lawyer in the South Carolina Low Country. And he's from a very wealthy family. His great-grandfather, grandfather, and father all at one time in their lives were solicitors, which is the equivalent of the prosecutors down there. And so amassed a lot of power and then went off into private practice where they also amassed a lot of money. So there's some really interesting issues down there. The story starts because Alec Murdaugh gets sued because his youngest son, Paul, is in a boat crash accident where he's used his older brother's ID to buy alcohol, and it's a terrible boat crash. One of the young people who's in the boat was killed, and there is a wrongful death suit filed against Mr. Murdaugh. He is a very well-known and well-connected lawyer in the area, and that really is the beginning of the end for him, because the next thing that happens is that as a piece of that wrongful death suit, they start asking for financial records. And it is discovered that he has been fleecing his clients and to the tune of somewhere between $7 and $8 million. And that doesn't include all of the loans that were made to him at really favorable rates over the years as well. It turns out that he has sort of this network of good old boys who have helped him pillage his clients' accounts. And suddenly this becomes a huge white-collar crime case. On the heels of that, then Alec Murdaugh's wife and his son Paul, who had been the subject of the boat crash, are murdered at their country home. He's now been charged with their murder on top of all of these hundreds of counts of white-collar crime. He is supposed to go to trial in January of this year, although I would be surprised if it happens that soon. But what has really been interesting is the fact that there is this very close-knit, very deeply established old boy network. And it extends for generations, and it is a lot of big money. And so it's been very interesting. The other really interesting part about this case is that it has pointed up how deeply the corruption goes into their judiciary. So one of the things that happens in South Carolina is that South Carolina judges are appointed. They are not elected, and they are appointed by the governor, and they're appointed by the good old boys. They don't have to be overly qualified. They just have to be well connected. So one particular judge, her name is Carmen Mullen. She has been implicated in signing off on these people borrowing money and charging expenses against their clients' funds, and in these big dollar personal injury cases, particularly in the case where the person is either disabled because of their injuries or is a minor. Those funds that they were supposed to be holding for people, they were pillaging and misusing, borrowing, charging exorbitant fees against. So, and this particular judge was in charge of signing off on a lot of those transactions. She also, she also has been called to task for some inappropriate comments and some abuse of her judicial authority in personal and private matters. So that one's going to be a really interesting one to watch. And I do want to give a shout out. There is a podcast called The Murdaugh Murders. It is hosted by Mandy Matney and Liz Farrell. They are investigative journalists who have been following this case since the boat crash about 3 years ago. So they have a wealth of knowledge, and you will find amazing information on their podcast. I think they're into the 40, into numbers in the 40s of the numbers of podcasts that they've made on this case. So if you really want to do a deep dive on that one, that's the place to go. And then let's talk about the Piketon, Ohio Wagner family murders. This is an incredibly tragic case. So sad. This is a case where two families who have lived in this small town and in this area for several generations, son and daughter get together and have a baby together. And then the matriarch of the family does not want the mother to keep the child. She wants thank you so much, QWERTY, for that donation for our moderators. And thank you for your comment about our content. To get back to Piketon, it really is sort of a twisted Romeo and Juliet story. These young people get together. The girl, I think, is somewhere around 12 or 13 when this couple gets together. They have a child together, and the matriarch of the family does not like the girl, does not want her to keep the child. and it turns into a battle over custody, and ultimately one family goes out and murders 8 members of the other family, including the mother of the child, um, the, brother and sister-in-law. There are 8 members of this family that are slaughtered in one night. And it has taken since 2017 to bring these folks to justice. And it's clear that the matriarch was involved in planning the murders, and that it was her husband and her sons that carried the murder out. So the first of the sons, George Wagner, the fourth, I think he is on trial now. And that trial has been going on for about a month. And one of the things that's interesting, and people might find interesting in light of the judge's orders on no cameras in the courtroom for day bail, is that this judge has allowed witnesses to opt in or opt out, or opt in with only audio. So it's interesting, the people who have opted in and those who have opted out. But a great many of the prosecution witnesses who are actually other than law enforcement, so the sort of civilian witnesses, have opted in. So we've seen a substantial number of the people who were witnesses for the prosecution on the stand. Interestingly enough, the younger brother took a plea and confessed, and is testifying against his mother, brother, and father. So the family dynamics are absolutely fascinating. This is a very insular family. Oh, good question. This is a very insular family. They homeschooled, they all lived together, even the adult children, they all lived in kind of a compound. They were all up in each other's business all the time. And so it was, they were heavily influenced by this matriarch who was uber controlling. So this is a good question. It varies depending upon your judge and upon the local practice. But sometimes what happens in a case where you have hundreds of exhibits, you don't want to lose track of those, or you don't want to lose management of those exhibits, because you need to be able, as an attorney, you need to be able to pull those exhibits back and forth as you're asking for testimony. There are a number of ways that exhibits get organized for court, depending on who's doing it and how many, and whether they're using a computerized database system. But in a complex case like this, you can have thousands of exhibits. So it makes some sense for the judge to say, before we move to the defense case in chief, I want to make sure that I have the prosecution's exhibits numbered correctly, that I'm certain that they have been offered, they've been received into evidence, and to take care of all those formalities to make sure that that piece of evidence doesn't get missed. Because remember, that's part of the appellate record. So if and when this goes to an appeals court, the judge is going to be wanting to make certain that all of the trial exhibits have been offered, received into evidence, any objections have been dealt with. So, and as you're going along in trial and you're making those offers of proof, and sometimes it can get confusing and you can lose track of it. We all very carefully mark off, when something's been offered and when it's been received, but those are important formalities when it gets to the appellate level. there's nothing worse than to have this key piece of evidence that you are relying on and that you have questioned your witness about, and it gets to the appellate level and they say, well, that's great, except that the court never received it into evidence, so technically we can't review it. So it's sort of out of an abundance of caution, I think, that they're taking these bits of evidence in chunks. I'm sure you will see them now. Once the defense has finished their case in chief, they will probably do the same thing. They will go back and review, make sure that they have taken care of all the evidence and that everything that's supposed to happen is happening. It's interesting that the particular judge who is hearing this case, his name is Judge Deerings, he's retiring. And the prosecutor, whose last name is Junk of all things, has been appointed to replace him. So because the prosecutor's been prosecuting this case, obviously that he's disqualified from hearing the case as a judge. And Judge Deerings has already announced, there was a question about this, so I'm going to answer it. Judge Deering has already announced that he will continue on the case. So when a judge retires, it varies from jurisdiction to jurisdiction. But I understand in Ohio, there is a maximum age of 70 for the bench, which is a little surprising, but so once you reach age 70, you must retire. But they do allow judges to come back and serve as senior judges to fill in for vacations and the odd case that needs an outside judge. And so Judge Deering has already said that he will continue to serve as a senior judge and that he will continue to hear the Piketon cases. And that's good. That means that you're going to get some judicial consistency in the case. You're not going to run into any sorts of problems with there being a conflict with the new judge. And so that is to answer that question. So I think I answered that question as to why they're arguing over the exhibits. I think it will be very interesting to see if Judge Boyce changes his mind about cameras in the courtroom on day bail, how he might structure that, that he could very well do something like this where he allows people to opt in and out. I think it will be I think it's more difficult to manage your courtroom. And I have some concerns about Judge Boyce's ability to manage a courtroom, particularly if you're going to have more than one jury. So it might be a little tricky. Linda asks, what did I think of Chad's sister-in-law's interview? I thought it was amazing. I have met Heather myself, and I think she is a remarkable woman. I think she has a remarkable family. I think that they have been through, in the last 3 years, they have been through a lot. I think that she's made it very clear that she was suspicious of Chad from the beginning, that she did not like the fact that he was coming into Rexburg with this idea that Rexburg was going to be ground zero for the apocalypse, that her whole family was somehow going to be involved and be part of this 144,000. She did not at all like the fact that they had moved into her ward. And I'm sure found it, in fact, I can't even say I'm sure, she did find it incredibly frustrating that she had been a member of that ward for 15 to 20 years, had been in all sorts of leadership to the extent that women are allowed in leadership in the LDS church, that she had all of those, that she had been someone that people really turned to and relied on and looked up to. And yet, when she began sounding the alarm for, hey, something's not right here with Chad, she wasn't believed. And people kept saying, oh, but he's such a nice guy. And I think that was really disappointing for her. I think it really undermined her faith in the church and her confidence in herself and in the church. I think that it is incredibly admirable that she made an individual and personal decision to leave the LDS church for a variety of reasons. But at this point, her family are still active members. So she is, and yet they have managed to synthesize that, to stay together, to support each other, to love each other through that. And I think that's a really admirable trait. I agree, Jan, the sexism in most religions enables a lot of harm. I could never be involved in a religion that didn't see men and women as equals. I belonged to a very large Lutheran church and was the president of the congregation for a couple of years in that church. And I could never have been involved with a church that didn't see my ability and my leadership abilities as just as valuable as anybody else's. I agree, Heather's story made my blood boil too. And this was not the first time I had heard it, and I still felt angry and disappointed and protective of her, because she is a remarkable woman, and she really is one of the heroes of this story. I know that she feels like she didn't do enough, and I don't think that's true, but I think that speaks to the kind of person she is. She has lovely children who are successful and who are making their way in the world. In fact, one of her sons just left on his mission. So they have been able to find a way to find common ground in the face of her leaving the church. And she has been able to find support in other places for her decisions as well. So if you have not seen Lauren and John Matthias's 3-part series, that is our interviews with Heather, that's on Hidden True Crime, and it came out this week and is available on their channel. I think that a lot of people could relate to Heather's story, even those who were not LDS, although I think that anyone who has left the church or is in that process of questioning, I'm sure, could relate to Heather's feelings. But I don't think it's limited to just the LDS church. And I admire her so very much. Shall we move on? Back to the Murdaugh case. Do I think the other lawyers at PMPED, that was Alec Murdaugh's law firm, and that law firm had been around for at least three generations, if not four, was started by Alec Murdaugh's great-grandfather. So the question is, do I think the other lawyers knew about his financial crimes? I think that some of them did, because I think any of the managing partners, the people who were involved in managing the firm had to at least suspect that there was something untoward going on in his finances. And I think that you'll find that there were people on staff, the bookkeepers and the people who were actually counting the beans and keeping track of trust accounts, were aware that there was something going on, and they were just kind of told not to worry about it, that it was kind of above their pay grade. So I do think that there were other lawyers who knew what was going on. One of the things that came to light, and Russell Lafitte is the guy who is on trial right now, who was the banker from Palmetto State Bank. He's the one that's on trial now. One of the things that came up was the fact that he was making loans to Alec at very favorable rates or no interest rates. And it was a common practice for this particular bank to loan to lawyers who were in the midst of maybe settling a big case and needed cash flow. And so there was kind of an agreement that the bank would loan lawyers money to help with their cash flow. So Dolly, I'm going to answer your case about Casey Anthony shortly, but I do want to get to the Delphi case. And then and we'll talk about Casey Anthony as well. The Delphi case is Delphi, Indiana, I think. Yeah, that's right. Small town. Two young girls, 12 and 13, go off on a walk in a park, and they don't come home. And after a search that goes over about 12 hours from one day into the next, their bodies are found in the park. Both of them murdered. And some very interesting things come up. At one point, one of the girls records a man who she felt was following them. Records his voice, records his walking toward them, his gait. And in spite of that, it takes 5 years before they finally arrested a suspect. The two girls' names are Libby German and Abby. For some reason, I want to say Wagner, and that's not right, but somebody will correct me. I have too many cases running around in my head right now. So Libby and Abby, the small town of Delphi has been trying, waiting and hoping for justice for quite a long time. So about 2 weeks ago, a man was arrested. He is he's the local pharmacy tech at the CVS drugstore in town. He knows everybody. At one point, he even gave them photographs for free because the family had come in to have some photographs printed of one of the girls. It's an interesting story for a number of reasons. It's another small town, so we have perhaps the same sorts of issues that we have in Daybell. Although Delphi is a much smaller town, we're talking 3,000 people. And Rexburg's about 19,000 if you don't count the students that come for college. So one of the interesting issues is that they announced the arrest, but they sealed the probable cause warrant, which is a little bit unusual. We even got probable cause affidavits in Daybell, but they have sealed the probable cause affidavit that convinced the judge to issue the arrest warrant. So we don't know the evidence that they have, and we don't know if there's anyone else connected. Over the years, the police identified some other persons of interest, including a fellow who admitted having contact with one of the girls just prior to her death. So there's been a lot of speculation about the possibility that these two people somehow were working together or were related to one another, that there's something going on, that they're both involved. But nobody knows, because the probable cause documents haven't been released. Now there is a preliminary kind of hearing coming up in November 21st, I think. And everyone is hoping that at that point, the probable cause affidavit will be released. Indiana actually has a law that says that they have to be released within like 72 hours. And that hasn't, unless the court orders and seals otherwise. So that hasn't happened. And there are a lot of people that are anxious to see that probable cause affidavit, and a lot of journalists that are very frustrated with the fact that it hasn't been released. I kind of come down on the side of, I think it should be released. I think that the public has a right to know what the basis of the arrest is. And unless there is some part of that probable cause affidavit that would cause threat of harm to somebody else involved in the case, or reveal a confidential source. And even at that, those issues can be redacted. So I think that it probably should be released, but I don't know that the judge will release it. And I think that at least one of the parents of the girls has asked the court not to release it. So, Delphi question: if the county prosecutor is related by marriage to the victim's family, can he still prosecute the case? I get that it's a very small town, so everyone is connected. Yes, everyone is connected. And no, I don't believe he should be prosecuting the case if he is related by marriage to directly to the family. Now, when you say related to marriage, maybe it's not that, maybe it's more of a distant relationship. But, I'm thinking related by marriage. She's married to a sibling of one of the parents of the girls, or something along that line. I mean, if he's married to somebody's second cousin twice removed, then maybe not. It's certainly will depend on the closeness of the connection. But if this is somebody who's going to that house for Thanksgiving, then no, he should not be prosecuting the case. This again sort of harkens back to the Daybell case and the relationships that people in a small town have. So since I don't know what the exact relationship is, and I hadn't heard that before, I can't give you a definitive answer, but I'd say if it's a close relationship, he shouldn't be. A good question. Is he related? I don't know for sure, but I'm sure somebody in the chat will, because you guys are on it. And any other questions about Delphi? Okay. Let's talk now about Casey Anthony. Casey Anthony's case is interesting. I have read the books that were written by both the prosecutor and the defense, and it's a sad case for those of you who might not be familiar with because it's been a while. Casey Anthony was a young 20-something. She had a little girl who was 2. Her name was Kaylee. And Casey was sort of one of those young people that's kind of living with parents, not living with parents, kind of in that early trying to launch phase. And so grandparents were very involved with the little girl. The case happened down in Florida. And the grandmother reported to police that she had not seen her granddaughter in, I don't know, a month or so. But that may not have been that unusual because Casey was in that sort of young, trying to figure it out phase. And sometimes she was there and sometimes she wasn't. She was an adult. So the grandmother called the police and said, I haven't seen my granddaughter in a month. She won't tell us where she is. She came home with her car smelling like a dead body. And I'm very concerned and I want somebody to investigate. And after an investigation, Casey was arrested on murder charges. And it wasn't until somewhat later that the little girl's body was found close to the grandparents' home. Now I do want to say that having read both books, her defense attorney from the beginning said that he believed the little girl had drowned in the pool. They had a above ground pool, and they would take the ladder down off the pool so that the little girl couldn't get up and get into the pool without an adult being there. And from the beginning, their theory of the case was that someone had left the pool ladder up. The little girl had gone in the pool and drowned. The grandfather had panicked and hidden her body. Casey Anthony all along alleged that her father had sexually abused her. I'm not supposed to say that, I think, or YouTube gets a little upset, but and accused him of abuse. And I think that I think that there are a lot of people. She is now doing a documentary and speaking out for the first time. And I think that there are a lot of people who may have not heard that theory early on and may think that that's sort of revisionist history, if you will. I'm not sure that that's the case, because when I read her attorney's book, it was clear from the beginning that had been his theory of the case. So, but I think it's gotten a little embellishment. The embellishment that she's added is not that the little girl somebody accidentally left the pool ladder up and she got in the pool and drowned. Now Casey is saying Grandpa drowned the child to cover up his bad behavior. I don't know if I buy that. But I've always thought that I've always understood, after I read both books, why the jury found reasonable doubt and found her not guilty, because there was kind of a plausible explanation that didn't include Casey doing anything untoward to her child. I don't know quite where I come down on it, but I certainly could see, and and I'm going to watch the documentary because I would like to see what she has to say, and maybe that will change my mind. Um, but I could see how a defense attorney could plant reasonable doubt by, just like we've talked about in the Daybell case with Alex Cox, being able to come up with an alternate theory that cast reasonable doubt. And in this case, it was the grandfather. And the grandfather didn't do himself any favors because he attempted suicide at least once after those allegations came out. Um, and so it made him look guilty, even if he wasn't. Well, the question is, do I think Casey Anthony could be not guilty? Sure, I think there's a possibility. I think that they offered what was a viable alternative to the case. Now, is Casey Anthony a nice person? Did she do the right things? Absolutely not. I mean, the average person, if your father, which is what she says, my father was standing there with the baby in his arms and she was cold and wet. He fished her out of the pool. The average person would have said, "Oh my God, call 911, somebody do CPR," but she didn't do that. And for reasons only she knows, if this story is true, didn't call authorities, didn't tell anyone, and actually allowed herself to be arrested for the crime and tried for the crime. Was she protecting her father? I don't know. I mean, I think that's possible. She certainly, I think one of the reasons why people are so skeptical of her story is because she acted so unusually. She didn't say call 911. She didn't she didn't try and revive her child. She didn't, and when her father, according to her, took the child away from her and said, "I'll take care of it, it's all going to be okay," she let him do that. But I mean, we all know of situations where there's abuse in a family and there's such an incredible imbalance in power for such a long time that the victim never thinks to challenge the perpetrator, to challenge that parent and say, "Wait a minute, of course you're not going to just take care of it." There's a very strange dynamic in victim perpetrator relationships, especially in families. So is that what happened? I don't know. Casey Anthony and her father are really the only two people who know for sure. But her attorney was able to plant enough reasonable doubt that a jury said, "We're not comfortable convicting her." Now, they did convict her on hiding evidence and lying to police and some other charges, and she did go to jail for them, but she was not convicted for the murder. And I think it's kind of like the OJ case. There's always going to be a faction who's going to say reasonable doubt, and there's always going to be a faction saying he got away with it. So it's an interesting case. I think in a lot of ways it's kind of a case study for high visibility, high interest cases. It was a case where there were we saw her jail recorded conversations with her parents. We saw a lot of information that I'm not sure the public had seen before in a case like that. Sleuthing Sandy, she is still throwing her father under the bus. Absolutely. I think if I were her lawyer, I would be arguing, yeah, well, dad threw her under the bus first. What parent allows their child to be tried for murder rather than admit to what he did, um, if her story is true? So, I mean, I can see the arguments on either side. I guess that's what makes a defense attorney or any attorney, is to be able to see the argument on both sides of a case. So I think that is another one that I do want to watch the documentary, and I do want to uh, get better educated about it. What about Kaylee's DNA in the trunk of Casey's car? My recollection, and it's been a while since I've read these books and a while since I've thought about the case, but my recollection is that it was DNA that could easily have been placed there by contact. So she's a little girl. She's, I mean, kids drool. They get body fluids on blankets and clothes, and then those things go in the trunk of the car, and that DNA can be transferred from her blanket or a diaper or you name it in the trunk of the car. So it's I don't know that it's dispositive of Kaylee's body being in the trunk. My recollection is that the amount of DNA could have easily been transferred from something else. Hi, Beth. Thanks for your question. Beth says, I did not follow this case, thankfully, but what evidence is there that shows abuse, that Casey was abused by her father? I don't know that there, as in many SA cases, it is a matter of he said, she said, they said, they said. And there is rarely, very rarely, physical evidence. And so to say what evidence was there, well, she was able, my recollection is that she was able to give some very pointed, detailed descriptions that would lend themselves to reliability. When you have a young child who is being interviewed in that kind of a situation, one of the things that interviewers really look at is whether or not this child is recalling a lot of vivid details, because that lends itself toward more credibility. Oftentimes, when you have a child that's coached, like Tylee in the Daybell case very likely was, the child doesn't have a lot of, doesn't give a lot of detail, doesn't come up with a lot of explicit kinds of descriptions. And so the more descriptive one of those interviews is, the more likely it is that there's something to it. But not always. In interviewing young children is an art, and it's very difficult and often unreliable. Linda, has any jury member spoken out on the Anthony case? I think they have interviewed jurors in the Anthony case, and I think their response was simply there was enough reasonable doubt that we were not comfortable convicting her of murder. There wasn't enough. There weren't enough dots connected. So, anytime we have a circumstantial case, meaning that we're proving it by the circumstances surrounding it and not on an eyewitness who saw it happen. We have to be sure that we're accurately connecting the dots so that this happened, then this happened, and consequently that happened. Because otherwise juries don't make that causal connection. So it's my recollection that the jury said they just did not feel convinced that she had committed a murder. What does Casey gain by doing the TV show? As Scott Reich would say, it's always about the money. I'm absolutely certain that that there's money involved. And I don't know how long her probation was. I think she had a lengthy post-prison probation, and she may have been prohibited from making any money off her story until her probation was served. I don't know the terms of her probation, but with a high visibility case like that, it's possible that one of the terms of her probation was you can't go out and make a bunch of money off this. Since she was not convicted of murder, the Florida Slayer statute would not have applied. But I suspect that, and I suspect too that that time enough has passed that people are not quite so passionate about their opinions in the case. And that means that there are people who may be willing to rethink their opinions. And that makes it more interesting. Linda says, I recall a jury member said if they'd known more, they would have had a different outcome. But maybe I don't recall properly. You know, I don't know in this particular case, but I would say that happens often in jury trials. I think it happens often because I think jurors are presented with the case within the confines of the rules of evidence. The rules of evidence are like guardrails. They are there to make sure that the information that is presented to the court is the most reliable and the most factual, as much as that's possible. And I think that sometimes jurors think, boy, if I'd only known this piece or that piece, I might have decided the case differently. But it may very well be that the judge decided that piece of information was overly prejudicial and that it didn't belong in the case. So it's a little hard, it's hard to say. I think most jurors would feel that way. And I guarantee in the Daybell case that there will be jurors who will say, if only I'd known, I might have decided differently. I think that's true with most juries. So the last case I want to talk about, if there are no other questions about any of the other cases, the last case I want to talk about is little Michael Vaughn. Little Michael Monkey Vaughn. He was 5 years old. He was playing in his front yard in Fruitland, Idaho, and disappeared. It was a year and a half ago. And John and Lauren have an interview on their channel, Hidden True Crime, with his mother, Brandy. And it is one of those cases where people jump to the conclusion that somehow his parents were involved. And it has been very, very difficult for them. I thought Lauren did a great job of interviewing the mom and of not jumping to that conclusion like everyone else There are a lot of content creators out there right now that are making sincere apologies because 2 days ago, law enforcement announced that they were digging up the backyard of a neighbor just a few houses away. And yesterday, I guess, a woman was arrested and arraigned on felony charges of failure to report a death, for failing to report the death of little Michael Vaughn. We don't know how he died or who killed him at this point. We know that those kind of charges tend to be placeholder charges, just like the Daybell case, where when the children's bodies were found, they were all charged with tampering with evidence and destroying evidence. And it wasn't until much later that we got murder charges. Now, I certainly don't think it will be a year like it was in Daybell before we get some other charges coming out. But I do think that it's going to be a little while the case is investigated, because unless something has been discovered late today, as far as I know, they still have not discovered his remains. I think they were tipped off that his remains were in these people's yard or in their next door neighbor's yard. So there's 2 yards they've been digging up. Like I was saying, she said, Lee here says, such strange charges in Monkey's case. His name is Michael Vaughn. His family nicknamed him Monkey. This is this adorable little blue-eyed blonde little boy. And if I had been a little bit better prepared, I would have had some pictures to share with you, but I didn't get there today. The charges, I think, like I say, are placeholder charges. I think that you're going to see other charges coming, but right now this was a way of securing the first of the potential defendants in custody so that they're not going anywhere. And I would suspect that she's also doing lots of talking. So I think that is a strategy that the prosecution uses, where they charge a charge that they know they can prove, but that really is kind of a placeholder to keep the person in custody while they do the investigation. And I suspect that there are going to be other arrests that are going to happen as a result of this. So there's an interesting twist to the social media part of this. And that is that there was a content creator who called the jail. The jail confirmed, I hope I have this right, that this woman, whose name is Sarah Wondra, had been arrested and had been arrested on a charge of failing to report the death of Michael Vaughn. And the family hadn't been told yet. So this woman released that information, and the family found out, confirmed that they were looking for his remains through social media. And that's a hard way to learn it. But it also created a huge furor in the true crime community, because people are blaming one another. So friends of the mom are showing how distraught she was when she found out that the charges had been filed, and then the other creators are shooting back and saying, you're just using this person because for clicks, or you wouldn't have put her reaction on YouTube. And so it does definitely point up not only the benefit of YouTube and all of the sleuths that are out there, but it also points up the downside as well. I mean, had it not been for an internet sleuth, we would not know anything about some of the things that have been going on with the prosecution in Rexburg on the Daybell case. We would have had no idea that there were Facebook groups and people were commenting on the evidence and those sorts of things had it not been for an internet sleuth. On the other hand, it can be damaging and really painful. So it is, with great power comes great responsibility. And I think sometimes YouTube creators don't realize how much reach they have and how damaging some of the things that they put out can be. So we're just at about the 1 hour mark, and I don't like to take up too much of your time. I am, thank you so much, Amy Lynn. I am interested in getting some feedback about whether Tuesday nights is good or whether you would rather that we move it to Wednesday so that y'all can go and listen to Scott. You tell me what you'd like. And, but I'm enjoying doing these kind of wrap-ups. I also, because I have been so focused on Daybell for so long and have said to so many people, I'm not going to do a bunch of research on other cases because I don't have that much bandwidth. Now that we have this lull and it appears that we're going to be waiting a while for these cases to get to trial, I have a little more time to think about other cases. And but I'm not entirely up to speed on them all. So it may be that you ask a question and I have to say, I need to look into that and I'll get back to you. But I will research and get back to everybody with answers to questions if you want to send those my way. I have several other cases that people have suggested that I talk about, everything from Letitia Stout to, I can't, I've got a whole list of them. So there are definitely other cases that we want to talk about. Monty, how's the book coming? You know, the book's coming great. I'm happy with where we are right now. I feel like I'm a little stuck because I think we can't go too much farther until the trial happens and we can get access to all that stuff that we're not getting access to right now. But all in all, the book's going great. I spent the whole summer with a whole stack of books and a lot of online and professional journals and online articles about LDS doctrine and how it sort of plays into this case and the whole prepper movement and all of those things. So I think I'm in good shape at this point. Absolutely. Thank you so much, mods. Thank you very much. And thank you for all of you who donated tonight and sent super chats for our mods. It makes a huge difference for them. And I appreciate them so much. I couldn't do this without them. And I appreciate that you all recognize that and are ready to support them too. A couple of other things I want to talk about before we close. I had this great idea. For those of you who don't know, I'm a quilter, have been for a long time, have taught quilting. And the mess that you see behind here is me unpacking all my quilting boxes to do this project, because I thought that it would be interesting, since we're not having a trial in January, for those who like to quilt or would like to learn how. I think we'll do a block of the month quilt, a true crime block of the month quilt. I come up with a pattern that I like, and I think that would be fun, a good sampler pattern that would be good to learn on. And so I thought it would be really fun if once a month I do a little instructional video and we do a quilt block together. So I had to get all my quilting stuff out in order to do that. And it's in a bit of disarray at this point, especially since my cats decided to sleep in it, and now looks like a bomb went off in my office. So, but I've had lots of folks that are very interested in doing this. So expect that I will be giving you way more information than you probably care to have about quilting in January, because I thought it would be fun for us to have something to look forward to do after the holidays. So with that, I think we'll wrap up for the evening. I so appreciate you all being here. I realize that we have almost 300 people watching, and I appreciate that tremendously, especially when I know I'm up against Scott, and he is he draws big audiences. So I appreciate y'all being here for me. Let me know about your scheduling preferences. Do email me with questions for the True Crime Tuesday, or if it's going to be Wednesday. And we will do this once a week. So I'm going to say good night. Have a great rest of your week. I'll see you all on Friday for the Daybell wrap up. And we've got a few things to talk about. And I think we'll talk a little bit more about scientific evidence. I think we have a few other things we might want to chat about. So until then, good night.